to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're going to be talking about this new moon that's coming up on Friday, which is quite a powerful one as usual. But this is powerful, this new moon is powerful in a different sense than the new moons that we've had recently, including the full moon, the lunations that we've had recently, including the full moon that we had on just January 10th, which was quite dramatic and which featured Saturn-Pluto very prominently. So this is the first lunation in months where I can say Saturn-Pluto is fading. This is the first time because we had, I don't know if you remember, but we had parallel between Saturn and Pluto for quite some time. And that was very interesting because it was a prelude to the Saturn-Pluto exact conjunction which took place last month on the weekend of the 10th, on the 12th exactly. And so that was a big weekend, and that was a big time of transformation for all of us and for the country as well. I mean, if you wonder if the culture is going through transformation, think about that. You know, here we are attempting to throw the president out of his office, and the Republicans are not into that, and they're all about keeping the president in his office. And so, does he stay or does he go? What is our country defined by? You know, what values do we have? Do we have the values that the progressives are trying to promote, the rule of law and taking care of the lesser value people with less money, or the Republicans are trying to push another agenda for the country, which does have you know, some implications for income inequality and so on. So, and business as usual and so on, and many Republican and Democrat administrations in the past that we are looking back toward, and we are looking forward into the future, wondering what it might be. So this is a very important time culturally and individually. And we've all been going through this transformational cycle of Saturn-Pluto as it's been building over the past 6 months, and as it's been realized in its moment of exact. It will come back by the end of the year in another way, but this moment of exact last month was really powerful, and now I believe that this lunation of the 24th of January coming up on Friday is going to be a different kind of spin on things, and I'll like to talk about that. Let me get over to the chart itself and see what we can do there. So what I'd like to show you in this chart is the prominence of this guy, Neptune, little old Neptune, which has been a little bit left out of the picture. We're talking so much about Saturn, Pluto. You know, the big guys are Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune. And so in this lunation, this new moon that's coming up right away, we have so much Uranus, Neptune that it's really cool. I think it's kind of a nice break from all the Saturn-Pluto. And we have Saturn-Pluto still prominent. I mean, they're only separated by a degree right now, Saturn and Pluto. But the parallel that was between them is fading. Saturn is moving on beyond Pluto. It will eventually get to Aquarius and then back up, and there'll be a big thing in mid-November where they're very close together again. Not exact, but very, very close together with Jupiter in the mix. The great triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto around mid-November, which I think will be a very dicey time. But let's talk about the current situation, and we're talking about this whole 30-day cycle that goes from now until, you know, almost the end of February. February 23rd, there's another new moon in Pisces. So here's the Aquarius new moon, and the interesting thing about this lunation is, once again, the sun and moon, very early in the sign, still pretty early, it's now 4 degrees, and 22 minutes of Aquarius. Well, that's perfect square pretty much with this almost 3-degree Uranus in early Taurus. And we know that Uranus doesn't go quite as good in Taurus as it might in Aries or in Gemini even, because it's kind of antithetical, being an airy, beyond this dimension kind of situation with Uranus, and yet Taurus is very much about being here and now, being in the body, being in this physical plane. So there's a contrast. And we do have that contrast really incredibly highlighted in this new moon, which has the sun and moon almost perfect square with Uranus right in the middle. There's a semi-sextile between Uranus, I'm sorry, I meant to say Neptune. Neptune right in the middle. So there is a semi-sextile between the sun, moon, and Neptune. And Neptune, you can actually click on the time passages software in the aspect line and just take a look, and it says Uranus semi-square within 0.9 degrees, less than a degree away from a perfect semi-square. So we do have this presence of Uranus coupled with Neptune by this 45-degree angle semi-square. And look, you have Venus coming up on Neptune, that's a conjunction. You have Mars making a square to Neptune from 14 degrees of Sag. That's a powerful boost. And you even have little Mercury coming along at 13 degrees of Aquarius, making a perfect semi-sextile to Venus. So, actually Mercury's in this picture as well. And then we have Jupiter at 12 degrees also kind of amping this up. It's one sign over from Mercury, and then 2 signs over, a 60-degree aspect to Venus. So all the inner planets are kind of involved with Neptune. And at the same time, we have a very powerful presence of Uranus. So we got Neptune, we got Uranus. What does that mean? Well, we might think about Neptune as taking a step back from the real world, taking a step into fantasy, taking a step into inner contemplation, what is going on below the surface, the unconscious process within each one of us, something that we really need to be more aware of. And then we have a lot of Mercury. So this is about awareness. Mercury is about consciousness. So I think it's quite interesting to see this contrast, and it really makes sense to me following the transformational period that we experienced in mid-January that we're coming away from and heading into February, and this new moon that defines most of February, and that will be also, of course, the first week of this lunation cycle will be the last week of January as well. And it's a very interesting time because we are in an aftermath of that peak of intensity, and we are in contemplation of what exactly our changes are about. What are we up to? And, we know that there's something happening. There's something happening here, as the songs from the 60s used to say, right? What it is ain't exactly clear. People carrying signs, and everybody says hooray for our side. I think that's a very topical, current, even though it's a 60s lyric, very topical and current to the present time. So, I think we're all kind of trying to mull over what's going on. Will the president stay in office? Will the election that we're doing this whole year change things in Washington, or more of the same? These are the questions that we have, and they go to individual as much as to the collective, and there is a very strong connection, as we're reminded by the Aquarius energy of this new moon, a strong connection between the individual and the society. In other words, we could be doing all kinds of things on our own, whatever we can find, which is our métier, which is something that we need to do, which is what our bottom line is, what we cannot not do. As we do these things, they inevitably affect society. So we are really in that whole dialogue, I call it a dialogue, between the collective and the individual, where we are finding our way forward in the midst of this collective craziness that we're in the midst of as well. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we need to keep thinking about. And I really do believe that the presence of Mercury in this configuration is kind of a significant one, because even though there's a spiritual component with Neptune and Uranus is all about the realizations you can have from deep intuitional understanding, what you can see when you kind of close your eyes to see, as the Grateful Dead used to put it. Once in a while you can get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And so pay attention, pay attention to what comes up from inside. Pay attention to what your intuitions and your hunches are, and how you can kind of justify your perception of what's going on, because that's what we're about right now. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to see where we're headed individually, what we're up to. What is this new year of 2020 going to be like? Are we going to have perfect 2020 vision, or are we going to have a clouded vision? And that's the question of Neptune. What are we really hearing? What are we really understanding? We can see that's very important in the culture right now. The Republicans are saying one thing. The Democrats are saying quite another thing. Who's right? Who's telling the truth? There's a truth on both sides, let's say, that the president is doing a good job and want to keep him there. That's their truth and the Republican truth, and I think that has some merit to it. But there's also the truth that, well, he kind of overstepped certain boundaries when he did what he did, and so that's what's going on. And we need to think about what we're really looking at. We need to understand what is the truth and what is what they call fake news in our individual lives as well. What is the truth of our situation, and what might you call the fake facts of our situation? What are we tied to in terms of just belief, and in terms of old belief that maybe we're ready to outgrow, or old ideas about ourselves that we may be understanding that there's a shelf life to them. And where are we about to take a new step, a scary step, into the beyond, which is what Uranus is all about, jumping the tracks of our existing, you might call it a rut. You might call it a rut, you might call it your safety zone. You know, it's like, what are you entertaining in terms of a new step forward, and what are you ready to let go of so you can make that happen? And are you really ready to let go, or are you going to be stuck the way Saturn keeps us stuck with the practicalities of our current path, which may be the old path, which may be an outmoded path that no longer works for us, or it might be a very valuable path that we do need to keep in touch with. And we do have a strong presence of Chiron. It is semi-sextile to Uranus, and it will be prominent in February as well. And it's something to think about, that it may be that our fears are keeping us back, because it's very important to recognize that Chiron individually, for each one of us, even in the, you can see it even in the USA chart, which I want to take a look at as well, just for a couple of minutes. So this is the main thing I want to get across, that we do have a kind of a reset that we're doing. We're kind of thinking about what happened and thinking about where we're headed, and trying to sort out the wheat from the chaff, trying to understand what is real for us, what is really real, what do we really need to do, what is our purpose. And always with that, we keep in mind that Eris, which is the feminine warrior energy, which is in each one of us the warrior that we hold inside ourselves to really act on our fundamental beliefs, our most fundamental beliefs, and only that. We can see the model in Greta Thunberg standing up to power, telling the leaders of the world they're screwing up and they've got to take action, take proper action, she says, and acknowledge climate change and start doing something about it. And here she is, a young 15, 16-year-old. And she's just out there making her stand, making her statement. And she does have very strong Eris in her natal chart, as you might expect, as I expected, and as I did find. So here we have Eris at 23 degrees of Aries, and it's a perfect square with Pluto. Pluto's at 23 degrees of Capricorn. So, and Saturn is still in the picture. So we do have this Saturn-Pluto-Eris situation, which will repeat at the end of the year in mid-November, kind of reminding us that we do need to take action based on what our authentic action is to take, whatever that might be. And we have to find ourselves in the process, and we have to pay attention, and we have to be introspective. And of course, we do know that Mercury, I don't know if everybody realizes it, but Mercury's coming up on its next retrograde period next mid-month. So it will, by the 3rd of February, I believe it is, exit Aquarius, enter to Pisces. Only gets to 12 degrees of Pisces, kind of close to Neptune, not quite. And then it stops, and then it goes backwards, and it gets to the 28-degree mark of Aquarius before it straightens, turns around to direct motion in March. So that Mercury retrograde period next month is kind of more introspection that's coming along. And it does kind of fit in with this Mercury presence here in this new moon, and with the Neptune presence, which is very powerful in this new moon, which does ask us to take a look at our ideals, to take a look at where we escape and where we stick to the line, and what we're doing as we do these things. Are we trying to escape? Are we trying to escape into a fantasy world? Are we trying to stay present with ourselves? And how can we discern truth from falsehood, true ideals from false ideals, and self-deception from reality as we go forward? So that's the message of this new moon. And let's take a look at the USA chart, just for fun, because it does hit the chart of the United States, as you might expect. So here I have the transits for January 24th, up here. And we do have this same presence of Mercury at 13 degrees. And the thing that we might notice, though, is that, by George, very interesting, Saturn is sitting in the U.S. chart, and this represents the executive. This represents both the executive branch and the process of government, which we're very much in focus right now. And there's an exact trine between that Mercury and this Saturn. There's also Saturn in the sky is at 24 degrees of Capricorn. That's exactly opposite the Mercury in the natal USA chart. So there's a lot of communication going on. There's a lot of, as I say, powerful Neptune in this configuration. So there is, and tied to Mercury to some extent, so there is that question of what's the true true, and what's the true false, or the false true. And we do have all that coming up now as we have these two competing stories being played out against each other on a national stage, and everybody in the country is being asked to make a judgment about it. What do you think is really going on here? We've got Mars right on the ascendant at 14 degrees of Sag, right on the ascendant of the chart of the USA, which is the chart from July 4th, 1776, around 5:10, or this is 5:13, almost 5:14 p.m., which is rectified by Dane Rudhyar. I like to use this one. So according to this, 13 degrees, Mars is right on the ascendant. Again, the 13-degree Mercury, it makes an angle to the descendant of the USA chart as well as to the Saturn in the US chart. And this is all very interesting stuff, including even the Chiron, because Chiron in the United States chart at 20 degrees of Aries is actually where we had the full moon of January 10th that we just were talking about, which was, which was right there conjunct the Capricorn Saturn-Pluto, and was the opposite was Cancer, and that makes a T-square to this exact T-square, partile T-square, 20 degrees to this Chiron. We're going through a painful time in our country. So I think these are interesting things to keep in mind as we kind of assess what the stars are telling us, what's the message that we're trying to get from the universe at this time. So that was kind of quick. A lot of information there, I think. I do want to keep track of these new planets, and actually another of this is Haumea, and this is Maki Maki, which I associate with activism. It turns out that Greta Thunberg has a strong Maki Maki in her chart. She has a very close grand trine between Eris, Pluto, and Jupiter, and it does hit. Eris hits by a partile in quincunx her natal Maki Maki, which is at 19 degrees of Libra. So I think it's very interesting to see that in her chart and to see that prominent in the chart right now, because it does make a trine to this new moon at 4 degrees Aquarius. So we have a lot of environmental activism potential in this lunation cycle, and we know we have the fires in Australia, we know we have the concerns of environmentalists that really have only these 12 years to turn things around and make it and mitigate the situation, try to get some of the carbon out of the atmosphere. They're talking about planting a lot of trees. There's going to be a lot more to come this year. I mean, this is going to be, to some extent, the year of environmental activism, and we are seeing a strong presence in some of these configurations of both Maki Maki and Haumea, which is also Earth energy connected to the Earth, understanding that nature is a prominent factor, that we can't have our own individual life apart from nature. So these are very, and of course also Haumea is prominent because it's square. It's going to be square exactly as Saturn moves on further into Capricorn. So we have a lot of these new nature planets that are coming along also, and just reminding us that that is an important factor in everything that we're doing. So at this point I'm going to transition out, go back to the other view. And I just want to say in closing that, we can get a lot of inspiration out of the planets, out of astrology. And what is astrology there for? It's there to tell us things. It's there for the universe to be communicating back to us as we make our efforts. The universe is meeting us by the messages that it gives us. And astrology it's amazing that astrology works. Astrology is magic. There's no way that causality explains it. It's not radiation, that we understand Venus as the feminine archetype that it is, and also for art and aesthetics. We understand it at a symbolic level, and that we have a symbolic level to our lives. It's just really important to recognize that. So let's see, this has been kind of short and sweet, but I think I'm out of things to say at the moment. I want to wish everybody the best with this new year and with what you're up to and dealing with. And remember that we have tools for you here at Astrograph software. You can go to astrograph.com. We have the Time Passages software, which is very good introductory software for under $100. As the first starting point, we have different levels of it: Basic Edition, Standard Edition, Advanced Edition. You can get more out of it. But it's a very good learning tool for getting to understand astrology in a more familiar way. And I think we have a report on sale this month as well. If I'm not mistaken, the transit report, is that right? The 12-month transit report. So anyway, take advantage of what there's a lot of free stuff on the site as well. So take it, a lot of free information about your sign. We have a monthly report that we do for each sign. So enjoy and pay attention. And best of luck with all of it. Take care.